On today's downloadable content, we discuss an aberration in the gaming world. Much of what drives game sales are reviews. It's what often determines a game's financial fate. A good review can mean success, while a bad one can doom the game or even an entire franchise. However, on occasion there are instances throughout gaming history where a game receives almost universal acclaim, and somehow that doesn't translate into financial success. We take a look at some games that suffered this fate and delve into why success never came to such gaming gems. It is here where they'll receive some of the limelight they so richly deserve, right now on downloadable content. Come one, come all, it's a free-for-all here. In episode 4 of downloadable content, we have an expanded panel. We have our panel plus one. So we'll start with the plus one. Say hi, Ben.
Hi, Ben.
Oh, God.
You asked for that one, Brian.
I know, I should never really open up with something like that. Hi, Erica.
See, Ben is Ben plus one. Is he Ben plus three versus I don't know, Giants?
Now you're assigning D&D stats to him. But yes, we have our panel of Ron, Peter,
hello,
and Erica.
Hi. Hello.
And yes, we have a plus one. We have a Ben.
Well, this plus one talk is making me feel a little self-conscious. Am I not good enough to be just Ben? Do I have to be the Ben plus one? Does it need to be a title as well?
Dude, that means you're magical. It means you're doing 1 extra damage to everything you hit.
I guess so. That is pretty awesome, actually. I should start introducing myself that way.
Well, tonight we're going to discuss underrated video games because I find it interesting because that is very true. As I said in the intro, a lot of what drives sales are reviews. There are instances, however, where a game gets glowing reviews, but does piss poorly for one reason or another. And I don't usually always know why that's the case. So, that is what we're going to discuss tonight. And I'm going to open up with a game that is familiar to all of us here on the panel, and hopefully some of you out there in the gaming world. It is called Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem. It was released for the GameCube. It was a GameCube exclusive. And it was notable in the fact that it got an M rating. And as we all know, M ratings for Nintendo exclusives are rare.
Wasn't it like one of 3 games to get an M rating?
No, they're more than that.
I'm exaggerating, but I mean it's kind of, yeah. On a Nintendo console, an M rating is kind of a rare thing to see.
I mean, even though Nintendo can just as easily play with the other big boys, Microsoft and Sony, we still have the mindset and the stereotype to which Nintendo, fully admits that they're much more family and kid friendly. So when an M-rated game comes out, it's shock and awe. But for those of you who don't know what Eternal Darkness is, it's a horror game, lots of blood, lots of gore, loosely based on the works of H.P. Lovecraft.
And as such, it is a mind screw.
Very much so.
Yeah, but that's the best part.
It is, and it was made by Silicon Knights, and that was one of the unique things about Eternal Darkness. It was that you had not only a life bar and a magic meter, but you also had a sanity meter. Anytime an enemy looked at you, you lost a little bit of sanity. As you lost more and more sanity, the game would start doing very funky things.
Some of those things looked like game bugs, but they were actually quite intentional.
Well, I remember my introduction to it via Ben, and Some of the earliest sanity effects I can remember. I won't list them all, obviously. You'll have to play the game to find that out. But one of the first things I came across was suddenly the volume dropped.
You really thought I was screwing with the remote on that one. That was hilarious.
Yes, I thought. I'm like, oh come on, somebody stop screwing the remote.
Well, my first introduction to the sanity effects was when my character started walking through the floor.
Yeah, it looked like a collision detection bug.
But it was intentional by the programmers.
Yes.
To make you look like you're going insane.
I always liked the one where your head popped off and ran away.
I remember reading the reviews for this game, and I remember seeing that it got a lot of rave reviews. Pretty much 8s and 9s all across the board. Yet, for all of its universal acclaim, it sold less than 50,000 copies. It sold even less than 20,000 in Japan. So, I ask you, why do you think that such a game with such high marks failed so miserably?
Can I go first?
I'll start with you, Ben.
I think we kind of hit on it earlier. In all honesty, it was a GameCube exclusive, and it was a GameCube exclusive horror title. It came out very early in the GameCube's life. You're talking about June of 2002, so the system has been out, 8 months at this point. Not even. Like November of 2001, I think, was when it launched. And you're right. Especially, we all know how this works. In the early days of getting a console, the people that tend to get those consoles are generally the diehard system loyalists. An M-rated game on a Nintendo system does stand out a bit, so you're probably not going to have a lot of people that are going to be going for that particular market. If you do, you're going to see them more getting the PS2 and whatever Resident Evil games or getting some shooter on Xbox. I know it's stereotyping, but it's also kind of true. So I think what happened was you were dealing with a very small market base to begin with. You're dealing with probably fairly tight, wallets at that point, and I don't think hype or anything really would have mattered. People didn't really know about the game until after it was really kind of off the shelves, and the ones that did know about it got it, but that was really kind of a small group.
That and Silicon Knights is a very small game studio to begin with.
Yeah, they didn't.
A long time though.
What's that?
Silicon Knights has been around a long time. They've been around since the early days of DOS.
They have been around a while, but I mean, again, if you're talking about it's if you're looking at a group that's mostly going to be Nintendo-centric, it was their first Nintendo title. People, maybe that they were trying to appeal to hadn't really necessarily heard of them. So it's not like they're that studio. I heard they did game X, Y, and Z. They're really well known. Obviously they have their following and they have their fans, but I feel like especially at that point it wasn't hyped in. It wasn't quite as hyped up as maybe it could have been, and that would be my guess as to why it really didn't sell.
Well, I think the game may have had more hype. Nintendo was the publisher and took over the promotion. I know that during those early days, Nintendo was trying to break the kiddie image. They were not successful, as we could see.
Yes, I remember the.
It was actually Nintendo's first published title that was rated M. So yeah, that's probably exactly what they're trying to do.
They had an exclusive deal with Capcom for Resident Evil that went on for 6 games.
Right, and even Resident Evil 4, when it was announced that it was going to be a GameCube exclusive, Capcom realized that they were going to make infinitely more money on this game if they decided to make it for other systems as well.
Right, so that goes back to the whole audience thing that Ben's talking about, that there just wasn't enough appeal for the Nintendo core audience. Despite Nintendo's best efforts to market the game, to try and bring out more, trying to break the kiddie image, there just wasn't enough interest.
It still surprises me, though, because, even then, Resident Evil was an established franchise. It was an established franchise. There we go. Use my words. It was an established franchise. It was already very successful. Why didn't the survival horror crowd, the audience that was gained by games like Resident Evil, Silent Hill,
I can tell you a little bit about that. I remember when I was still in college at Schenectady County Community College, a lot of the people I talked to, other students were like, I said, hey, but Resident Evil is going to the GameCube. Don't you want a GameCube? And they're like, no, I don't want a GameCube. Resident Evil can go to hell. We want Devil May Cry now. a PS2 Devil May Cry. That's what they wanted. Resident Evil jump to GameCube. Next thing you know, they'd say, "Oh, Capcom's being traitorous." Probably a fanboy attitude for sure, but that's the sentiment I overheard.
I also wonder if maybe because Eternal Darkness was an unusual type of the horror genre. I mean, the only other game I can think of that is a mind screw as much as Eternal Darkness was Silent Hill, and that was just more on the creepy aspect. Eternal Darkness was actively trying to make the player kind of go crazy, which is
And it actually did. I mean, I remember playing the game. I had an all-nighter playing Eternal Darkness.
That's a bad idea right there to begin with.
Oh, that was an awesome idea.
It was a great idea. We were at a friend's apartment, and it was going. I was playing this game all night, and when the sun was coming up, 12 hours later, for about a minute, I seriously thought the sunrise was a sanity effect.
Yeah, that was awesome.
So I thought the rising sun. I'm like, wait a minute! I did not just play this game all
night.
And I did. Erica, what say you? Since you've watched me play it now to completion.
Yeah, and I gotta tell you that it's the only way I would have ever seen the ending because I can't handle games like that. I started playing it because we have it, and I started playing it. I watched Peter play it for a little bit, and I was like, okay, maybe I can handle this. I started playing it, and my hands were shaking too bad by the time I got to the
bathroom scene?
We won't talk about the bathroom scene in Polite Company. No, the chick in the temple in the jungle. By the time I got there, I was just like, I can't hold the controller. My hands are shaking too badly. And I was playing it in broad daylight. So as far as why it didn't go over well, I think you guys are right. I mean, as much as I hate to admit it, I think it was just a platform problem, and not saying that's right at all. That definitely should not have gone down like that, but it is what it is.
A lot of fanboys miss out on a good game because of that.
Yeah, and it's really truly unfortunate. So, if I can go down for the record as saying that fanboys need to kind of pull their heads out of their rumps and play the games that are good. There it is.
So I'm getting the general consensus from all of you that basically it was a console issue. It came out for the wrong console.
Can I put a slight counter to that as far as
Go ahead.
It's fanboyism?
Go ahead.
I guess it is to a bit of an extent, but the point I was trying to make more was like, I guess it is the fanboyism, but I feel like people just, like you said, Brian, it came out for the wrong console, not in the sense that, the audience couldn't handle it or people didn't want to play that kind of game. They took a gamble they figured, okay, there's not really a tap market, we can get this. I don't think people would have, I feel like if it had come out on other consoles, people wouldn't have spurned it just because it happened to have been made for the GameCube. I think it was just the kind of thing where people didn't play it just because they didn't have the availability to play it. Let's not forget, most people don't go multi-platform. Most people usually just have their one system and they stick with it. So, it's almost the fanboyism idea kind of just, I don't think it was like that people were actively going out of their way to negate it. It was just kind of it didn't come out for the system that I own. Not in a like going out of their way to avoid it kind of mentality.
Well, as a small counter to that, though, it was my experience, and Erica can testify to this, as she had worked during Christmas season at a toy store the year the PlayStation 2 came out. There was such a huge, infinite demand for the PlayStation 2 during the 6th generation that it basically was Microsoft and Nintendo fighting for second place. There was no way that these two companies could have produced anything that could meet Sony's, just the sheer demand for Sony.
We call it the Sony Steamroller for a reason.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was trying because Peter at that point had shown me what the Dreamcast was capable of, I had parents swarming in from miles around looking to get their grubby little paws on a PS2. And I would try and push a Dreamcast, because we didn't have any GameCubes either.
GameCube wasn't out at that point.
That's right. My bad. Getting my timeline screwed up. But we... It was a while ago. Leave me alone. But I tried to push the Dreamcast, because from what I had seen, the Dreamcast was a better evolved system and was capable of just as pretty graphics, in some case prettier, i.e. Soul Calibur. So I was trying to push that, and parents were not having any of it. They were just like, if I don't come home with a PS2, I'm going to get skinned come Christmas morning.
And a lot of parents probably did get skinned because demand was so high and supply was non-existent that year.
That's just the nature of the holiday season, though. It's Christmas cheer goes right out the window.
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind, too, the PS2, when it first came out, I think was $400, and it was flying off the shelves. People have seen the picture of the Wii little animation where it just prints money for Nintendo. That's what the PS2 was come 2001 for Sony. It just did nothing but print money.
Be that as it may, Eternal Darkness fell by the wayside, but I was glad that I was introduced to it, because it was as a direct result of that game that I have read many of the works of H.P. Lovecraft, and they're fun.
I'm not sure if I would say you're better off for it. Probably have a different view of the world now, though.
Yes. So we move on. We move on to something a little bit more recent. We're going to shift to Okami, which came out in 2006, I believe. And another game that got universal acclaim, but at launch, even the first few months it was out, it barely made a dent. I remember seeing reviews for it, and when it came up for Game of the Year titles, I forget which publication actually had Okami as their Game of the Year, and they also put a note on it saying that that Okami is the least commercially successful Game of the Year ever. So, this time I will shift to Erica to open this argument. Why do you think Okami didn't do as well as it should have?
That one blows my mind. I don't know. Fantastic art style, wonderful writing, excellent concept. I don't know what rock people were sleeping under, but they missed one. They just really missed it, and it might be. It might be that the concept was just a little too esoteric for people.
Little.
But, I mean, when I heard about it, I was just like, oh my god, I've got to get my hands on this game. So, I really don't know what...
That was going to be my next question. Do you think the whole concept of the game put people off? We have this sea of shoot 'em, kill 'em, destroy 'em, blow 'em up. There's piles of those types of games out there. Do you think a concept like that, the plot being very heavily influenced by Japanese myth and legend, do you think that, put off the gaming population at large?
I would... Part of me would say possibly, but then I'm left with what happened with Valkyrie Profile. Valkyrie Profile 2 was announced, and there's an esoteric game. I mean, that is a Buddhist story told through Norse mythology. There's esoterica for you right there. And when Valkyrie Profile 2 was announced, the original Valkyrie Profile for PlayStation shot up to $250 if you could find it. So
$500 at one point.
Yeah. So Peter and I were awfully glad we owned it. So I don't know if it's just that that Okami was just more blatantly esoteric, and that Valkyrie Profile kind of had a more strong fantasy, regular high fantasy crowd to pull from. But to me, that there's a lot of overlap between the two titles in terms of just going out into unexplored territory. So I'd like to say that maybe it was just the fact that it was just a little too out there for some people, but there are other things that make me think that no, that really wasn't it. So I'm not sure.
I think possibly another reason for it, Okami not selling as well as it should have, was that was like the beginning of the downturn for the PS2. Memory serves, the Wii just came out in 2006, or had just been out for a year. The 360 was about to be released, or was just released. The PS3 wasn't that far off. I think people were just too busy looking forward to the next generation and didn't really care too much about the current one.
I would probably actually really agree with that. Okami came out, looks like September of 2006, which would have been about a month or two before the Wii's debut and the PS3's launch in the US. And I think if anything, it was kind of a little bit of a combination of like, maybe because it was so esoteric, and maybe because when it was coming out, but also because there were a lot of people that I remember looked at that, or read previews of it and said, "Oh, that's great. Call me when I can play it with a Wii remote," because by that point, the idea of like the drawing concept, I think people were really hyped up for maybe the Wii's interaction with how they thought it would play, and they thought that would be a better medium for it.
It did happen.
Of course, yeah, it did happen. But I think that definitely could have had something to do with it. I don't know that I totally buy the esoteric theory thing, though, just because, look at games like Katamari Damacy. It's not quite necessarily on the same page, but if you're trying to explain it to somebody, who maybe not necessarily be as interested in games, or, just from a different perspective of, you roll around a ball that just keeps getting bigger, it doesn't quite sound as much fun. And while it's another game that didn't necessarily sell very well, the people who did play it were very kind of interested by it. I know a couple of people who did pick up Okami, played it, and kind of said, okay, it necessarily didn't find it to be extraordinary as far as a game goes. The other problem with the timing theory is that there are PS2 games that did sell well while the PS3 and the other newer systems were on the market. So I don't know that there's necessarily a direct answer for this one.
I think it was a combination of the unusualness of it. If you break it down, really, it's just Zelda for the PS2. But I think it's just a combination of the unusual style of the story it told, in combination with the timeline. That kind of... I also don't think it was really advertised all that well either. And advertising can also have a big impact on the success or failure of video game sales.
No, that's true. They probably would have been hyping the PS3 and at that point more than anything for the PS2. It's kind of reminding people, oh yeah, don't go out and buy that new thing. There's still the thing you have at home that you've loved for the past 7 years that's still pretty awesome. So yeah, that would also make a lot of sense that they didn't advertise it very well.
What you said about the thing for it coming out for the Wii, though, that is true. I know that when I found out that there was going to be a Wii version, I said, okay, wait, I'm holding off for that because I'd much rather play it that way, and I love my copy of Okami for the Wii. It's one of my favorite games.
Yeah, Brian, I remember watching Wyatt play it in his room, and my exact words to him were okay, why can't I do that with a Wii remote? Think about how the analog stick worked at that point. It worked as far as an interface, but it was a lot slower, and I remember trying to play it and think, no, I can do this better. So yeah, I would be really surprised if I was the only person that had that kind of response to it.
I have to wonder, though, if part of the reason why the game may have had some less inspired audiences, the graphics model was Sumi-A, which is ink and wash painting from medieval Japan. And you have a lot of people who are looking for more photorealism, or how much you could get in the 6th generation. And then you see a game that looks like a painting, and they go, what's going on? Now, for gamers like us, that's a really good thing. But I have to wonder if a lot of other players were like, huh, what is this? And then you throw in the whole Shinto theme, which is largely unknown in the United States, whereas something like Norse mythology is much more better known, or maybe Greek mythology or other fantasy or Tolkien fantasy themes. It really does set the game much more apart than you might think.
Well, I mean, it sounds like we have a combination of factors. I mean, you guys bring up some very good points. I now that you mention them, I do remember the current generation of systems, coming out shortly thereafter. That, and as Ben said, at that point, magazines and publications and websites were probably pushing and hyping up the upcoming systems. I think all of those seem to contribute. I'm looking at the sales figures for Okami. Under 600,000 total units. That's for the PS2 and the Wii versions combined. So,
and more than half of that, it looks like, was the Wii version. Looked like they're saying about 270,000 for the PS2.
Yeah, and I could understand it doing a little bit better on the Wii, given the whole brush mechanic.
Yeah.
So
here's a question, guys. Let's say 7th generation, and this thing gets we get a sequel for Okami that's released on all 3 platforms, because now all 3 of them have motion mechanics, motion sensitive controllers. Do we think it would do any better now?
I do. I don't think it would. Sorry, go ahead.
I don't think it would do very much better. The whole theme is still too different. It's great. I personally think it's a great theme, but we having a much more stronger resurgence of a lot more popular culture themes that's recognizable to a more wider American audience. So games that are more strictly Japanese themed are less popular than they used to be. You even take a look at the current 7th generation games. JRPGs, as a general rule, were used to rule in the 3rd, 4th, 5th generations, and they're practically non-existent now. So then you take something that used to be recognizable, and that's disappearing. I really like the question: how well would Okami do if it was updated for the 7th gen?
I tend to think that it might do marginally better, partially because now you're releasing it across all platforms. You're giving more people more options to buy it. I've always felt that the more platforms you release a game on, the better chance of it selling and getting the numbers you want. I think we're reaching a point where console exclusive titles are sort of becoming the thing of the past. I mean, you'll still have them, but
don't forget, Brian, note that you still have a higher cost to create games on multi-platforms.
Yes.
Or you have to use a multi-platform development kit, which will limit your ability to actually create the game.
Well, that's very true. However, there is a sequel coming out. It's going to be on the DS.
So, I will be buying that.
So will I.
So,
well, you wouldn't have to get one, though.
You'll get to use the stylus, I guess, as a brush, the brush mechanic.
Yeah, I feel like the Kinect interface would really kind of be limiting, if anything, for those kinds of brush mechanics. Just, I feel like that's definitely a situation where we're going to want some kind of direct interface controller. Just having the nebulous I can move would I feel like hamper your ability to play. Whereas I feel like obviously you could, but I mean then again at the same time you have to tell the system somehow to differentiate between I'm just moving to get myself in position and I'm actively trying to paint something now. Otherwise you don't have, with like the Wii remote or with the PlayStation Move controller, you can push down a button to tell the difference between this is just tracking just for me getting a position, and this is me actively trying to do something. It'd be a lot harder to trick that on the same way without using a controller interface on Kinect, and if you're going to be using the controller anyway, you might as well not be standing and waving your arms around to do it.
Yeah.
So that's the only reason why I don't feel like it would be as efficient on that particular console. As far as just pure numbers, I can understand where you're coming from, Brian, but at the same time, it doesn't matter how widely you release a game, or how easily available you make it. If there's no real interest behind it, it's not going to sell. And I think some of the other points about it being so not unapproachable, but so different than what people are expecting, I think that would still definitely hold true. I feel like you'd really have to kind of take the core gameplay and revamp just about everything else to get really people interested. You'd probably want to do like a darker theme, or change the setting, or change the whole mentality behind it, and then suddenly you're not dealing with the same game anymore.
Yeah. Fair enough. All right, we'll bring up one more game then before we cut to break. This was suggested earlier. This was suggested by Ben. We're going to go to Beyond Good and Evil. And as I'm not totally familiar with the game, anyone here care to divulge a little bit about it?
Go ahead.
Well, basically, it's kind of a title that's a little bit, again, off the beaten path. It's kind of it's an action adventure title, so a little bit more in the vein of like a Zelda, except that's sort of where some of the comparisons end. You play a photographer who's trying to expose government corruption and conspiracies. Some of the other objectives of the game include actually photographing a lot of different wildlife around on the island that on the world that you live in. And it was done by Ubisoft. The interesting thing about that was I feel like it came out right around the same time that Ubisoft was releasing the Prince of Persia: Sands of Time, so there was actually a decent amount of focus on them for that title. And then suddenly there's this other game that they have coming out that just nobody bought. This one, Brian, does actually kind of defeat your argument because it was released simultaneously across all of the 6th generation consoles. So there was... And as well, that's right, as well as on the PC. So
that's how I beat it.
So it was universally available. There was no complaint of anybody not being able to get it. But it just really did not sell. It has developed a very interesting and fairly strong cult following. It's actually about to be re-released in high definition for the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360. And there are constant rumors that have quasi been confirmed of a sequel. So this is kind of a success story, but at the same time, as far as sales, it really just did not move very, very, very many units.
Right, and as I'm looking up the game here, there was some quote official reasons as to why the game tanked, despite its great reviews. Let's see. The official U.S. PlayStation magazine said that the poor sales was as a result of an oversaturated market. Also, lack of marketing, lack of advertising.
Memory serves, Beyond Good and Evil came out 2004?
Late 2003.
Okay. Late 2003. Action-adventure games at that time on multi-platforms.
Actually, yeah, it looks like Ubisoft was mostly just pushing Prince of Persia. So they didn't really advertise it that much.
So they were competing against themselves.
Yeah.
Still, it's never good when a video game developer is competing against itself. I mean, we all know how well Prince of Persia, is doing. To try to release another game of, that high caliber, when you're trying to divide your attention between those two franchises, someone's going to get the short stick.
Yeah. Now, unless you have a marketing budget the size of BioWare or Blizzard, then one of those games is going to get the short stick.
I mean, and that was the funny thing was I do remember there being some articles, and not articles really, but mostly like magazine advertisements for Beyond Good and Evil. But I also remember how vague and how kind of they were, I guess, trying to drum up some mystery, and they were intentionally, kind of just these pictures where not a lot of information is given, which can be a positive, but I guess in this case, a lot of people looked at it, didn't know what they were looking at, and decided they weren't all that interested.
Yeah, if memory serves, one of the ads was just her holding a camera, and she's kind of like peeking around the corner, and like you see a couple screenshots, and that was of the game, and that was it. There was really no explanation or information I saw in the ad that said, "Hey, this is an action adventure game," or "Hey, you're going to use your camera as your weapon."
Right.
And even if they'd said you're going to use your camera as your weapon, I don't know that necessarily would have drummed up that much interest from people.
Yeah, I think that's true. The other thing is, and I mean, I've seen this happen a few times. Jade was a fantastic character, and I loved her design. But she did run around throughout the game in a jacket, jeans, skater sneakers, and the most skin you ever saw was her belly and her face. That was it. And I wonder if maybe that turned off some of the larger guy crowd.
Interesting point. The lack of sex appeal. That's a very
I think she was great.
point.
Well, it's hard to say, because there are some successful female characters in games that have no sex, or very little to no sex appeal, like Samus Aran or Lenneth Valkyrie. And mostly you get to see Samus Aran is if you can get her, you get to see Zero Suit at the end of the game.
Yeah, but she also has the brand name recognition behind it. When people were playing the original Metroid game, they thought they were playing as a dude.
Yes.
It was
Yeah,
kind of a
when
surprise
the
at the
game,
end.
they was like, "Oh
Yeah,
my
I remember
god, that's a
one guy's
girl."
like, no, it's got to be a guy. He just has a large chest.
I mean, most of the appeal is not the fact that you're playing as a woman. Most of the appeal there is the fact that there's a core history behind those games. This was an unknown title, and it was very blatant about the fact that you're dealing with a female character that's not going to be showing a lot of skin. That's a very valid point. It may have just been that the core market, which let's not kid ourselves, the core male market, really may not have been that interested in that title, or may not have been that interested in that character. It's been shown time and again how difficult it is to get a female lead to really be accepted by the gaming community at large, the male part of the gaming community at large.
Alrighty, some excellent discussion going on here, but we are going to take a short break. When we come back, more games, more great games that went by the wayside. We'll be back. Welcome back to the second half of Downloadable Content. We continue our discussion about underrated video games. A lot of good discussion going on, talking about great games that failed to make a dent, really, in the grand scheme of things. So we'll continue that discussion by shifting over to another game. We go to Ico, which, if memory serves me, was released on the PS2.
You're correct.
Yep, and September of 2001.
Oh, okay. So, pretty early on in the PS2's life, that sounds like.
Yep, that's I guess that would be about a year after the U.S. release.
Okay. And, I remember reading about this game and finding that the plot itself seemed to be a bit cerebral. It's, slightly esoteric. But I remember reading that, this game was great reviews. I mean, it even received awards. It was right up there with, in Game of the Year discussions for that year. 2001 saw the release of games like Halo, Metal Gear Solid 2, Grand Theft Auto 3. So, if it was definitely in the discussion with those games, you would think that, oh, well, this game was, great. But it's sold, it had most of its sales in, outside of the U.S. So, looking at the sales numbers here, Ico sold, 700,000 worldwide, with, 270,000 of those just in the U.S. So, I'm looking at that, and that tells me that one of the reasons why it might not have sold so well here might have been just a simple culture. Different gaming cultures in the different countries. I wanted to bring this up with Okami. It did much better in Japan than it did here. Probably, I think, one of the reasons being, again, the culture thing. I don't know if the U.S. U.S. gamers really give a shit about Japanese legend and folklore.
Most don't.
Well, it also becomes a bit of a problem if the game doesn't go out of its way to explain it. I mean, it's a little bit difficult it's a little unrealistic for them to necessarily expect U.S. gamers to know that kind of culture and back history. And obviously, part of these games part of the idea tends to be a bit of minimalism and not like just diving into this, head first into a lengthy story. So they're not going to go out of their way to explain it. So it's a little bit of, they're not giving you the information you need, and you're not going to naturally have it. More, I think, than just kind of like people not caring necessarily.
Okay, so that sort of lack of knowing, where, the lack of knowing where the game is going or what the game's about. You think that might have driven gamers away?
Well, I think also, I mean, getting into the gameplay itself, you're talking about a game where it's very, isolation is a strong theme. You really don't have a lot of support. You don't really have a lot of necessarily interactivity other than with enemies. Sure, you're in the game, you play a character, Ico, and you're walking around a castle with a princess, but you have to really kind of drag her through the entire game. You don't really have a lot of interaction except with enemies and with her, and she doesn't really speak much or offer any kind of character development. For most of it, it's really kind of just, you're there and you might as well just be by yourself.
And the interaction with the enemies half the time is you're running away from them because you don't have a weapon, and they hurt you and they kill you in like one or two shots. Like, you have to go through nearly half the game before you get a simple staff, and that's like the only weapon I think you get until the very, very end of the game itself.
The more popular, the Shadow of the Colossus, which was kind of the spiritual sequel, was much more, well known, and that same kind of, at least in that game, you had weapons, but as far as the isolation, your only companion in that game is your horse, and as far as interactivity, it's kind of similar in some ways, because the horse isn't going to talk to you, the horse isn't going to, really develop that much of a character. And the princess kind of also doesn't give you a lot to bounce off of, so it's kind of the games kind of making you kind of just keep playing inside your own head, and people don't necessarily want that from their games. They're going to want to be maybe spoon-fed a bit more of a story and just kind of told more of what's going on than letting things stay nebulous. At least US gamers.
Yeah,
that's obviously.
I was that was going to be my next point. I mean, Shadow of the Colossus, as you mentioned, keeps a lot of the same minimalist, solitary sort of gameplay. Why did that game do a bit better?
It was hyped a little bit more. It definitely. I feel like they kind of learned from Ico a bit, and put a bit more marketing behind it. But other than that, it's also maybe a little bit more of a concrete concept that people can grasp. It's you're fighting these very specific things. You maybe don't have you still have minimal amount of like story and interactions, but I guess maybe with the goal being a little bit less nebulous, that helped people's understanding of what the game was and why they wanted to play it.
Yeah, I remember Ico being hyped immensely when E3 happened. Like, people saw the tech demo for the first time. I was like, oh my god, you can have this level of graphics, and this is like, we're talking near movie level graphics, and you can play this? This is amazing! And then Ico came out and sold as much as it did. I think with Shadow of the Colossus, you have a goal in mind for each stage. Like, in Ico, you're just walking around the castle avoiding enemies. And you're not really sure where you go, what to do. In Shadow of the Colossus, at least you know your main goal eventually is to defeat all the Colossi.
Yeah, like I said, a bit more direction I think definitely helped, and I'm sure that may have very well influenced the design decisions when making the next game. They did still keep it very, very minimalist, but you still are given at least more direction on what to do and how to go about it. Ico was a bit kind of more just, okay, here, you've been given this thing, figure it out. And honestly, like I said, a lot of people play video games to be lazy or to escape. They don't necessarily want to have to think all that much. That's what puzzle games are there for, but puzzle games are not traditionally the most popular titles. I think that could have had a lot to do with it. People just didn't want to play the kind of game that they were being given.
Alrighty. Peter, Erica, anything else?
I can't speak much to Ico. I can't actually speak at all to Ico because I haven't seen it. I haven't even played a demo. So, I really can't say anything about that one. Shadow of the Colossus, however, I remember the very first words out of my mouth when I saw the game were, "Holy crap, that's pretty." I was absolutely enchanted by it in terms of lighting effects and just the raw expanse of landscape that was out there. And I felt, you guys talk about the isolationist thing. When you were out there riding on your horse on your way to kill the first Colossus, you felt like you were the only damn thing in the world. They really captured that. If the idea was to make you feel like you were on your own, mission freaking accomplished. And I thought it really lent a nice tone. However, I do remember thinking, because I didn't see it played all the way to the end, I was watching my brother play it, I do remember thinking towards the end, this is really cool, but I have absolutely no idea what's going on. And it really did kind of, as wonderful as the rest of the game was, it really did make me feel kind of, why did all that just happen?
It kind of exploded all of the story in one shot at the very end.
Yeah, and then you had these cutscenes at the end, and I kept feeling like, okay, there's something else, right? No.
You're waiting for the plot to arrive or an explanation, and it doesn't get there.
Yeah, I was waiting for it. It felt like I had borrowed a book from the library, and somebody had ripped the last chapter out of it. And I'm like, but what happened? What?
Like there was just clearly some part of the story that you just weren't being told. And I mean, I guess that would also probably again tie into the American gamer versus Japanese gamer kind of story. It kind of the end of the story, you know, is kind of a bit of a tie-in to Ico, and the joke there, I guess the humor is the fact that people didn't play Ico, and so suddenly people didn't understand what they were looking at the end of the story when it kind of sets up a little bit of an explanation of what's going on with Ico. So you know, yeah, like a lot of it, the whole thing about Ico is that the kid was banished because he, well, I don't really want to get too heavily into the plots, but the whole thing about Ico was the kid was banished from his village because he had horns, and that was considered a bad omen. And in Shadow of the Colossus, there's a scene featuring a child with horns, and it's kind of a little bit of a tie-in to show you that this is the same universe. It's not gonna, you know, you're not missing, you know, much. There's not like a tome somewhere explaining everything, but you are still left out of the loop. And yeah, I could see how that would kind of off-put some gamers. Or I mean, think about it. If somebody tells you, if you're looking forward to a movie, and somebody tells you and says, well, you know, I liked A, B, and C, but the ending was really weird and it didn't explain a lot, it's going to kind of turn you off, because you're not going to want to see a movie that's going to leave you feeling unfulfilled. And it's going to be the same thing with a game. If people started hearing that maybe the ending was a little weird or they didn't quite get it, you're not going to be so quick to jump on the title, because you know at the very end you've got a big headache waiting for you, and that's not really what you're going to want to look forward to.
There you go. Good point,
So-
that.
Just a quick question. If you guys have been keeping tabs on it, because you seem to know the franchise better than I do, is The Last Guardian going to kind of maybe pick up a little bit where Shadow left off?
I wouldn't think so. I would think, in all honesty, they're probably going to keep the story pretty vague again. They've kind of, I don't even know that he's out and out said that it's all, you know, really interconnected. It's obviously there's a giant creature in The Last Guardian, but you know, and we know it's by the same studio, and it's, you know, the same visuals and the same bloom lighting and the same everything. But I don't really remember reading anywhere explicitly. I mean, I guess in my head I've kind of always just assumed, okay, sure, there's going to be a connection, but you know, I don't know that they've necessarily said that this is going to tie up any loose ends in the story or anything like that. I think that would go against what he was trying to do with the games. But at the same time, I feel like it's going to probably be kept simple. It's probably going to leave you in the dark on a few things, much like the first two titles did. I don't think it's going to go out of its way to wrap up any story loose ends, just because then I think he'd have to explain them. I think maybe part of the idea is to leave it intentionally vague for the gamer to decide. But that will turn some people off to it. You know, they want to be spoon-fed. They're not going to necessarily want to try and figure out what was going on.
Well,
I mean, that'd just be my guess.
Well, I mean, you know, we've tugged on a thread a little here with the whole, you know, American gamer and Japanese gamer, you know, mindset, which brings me to our next game. This game came out for the Super Nintendo, so now we're moving back in time a little. You know, yes, we're going to probably date ourselves with this one, but that's okay. I'm talking about Earthbound, which came out for the Super Nintendo, which features everyone's favorite Smash Brothers character, Ness. Yes, yes, this is where Ness came from. For those of you listening out there,
He did have an origin outside of Smash.
yes, it wasn't just a Smash created character. Ron, take it away.
Alrighty. So Earthbound came out, let's see, Japan 1994, North America 1995. The story itself is pretty.
9 years old.
Yeah, I was 8, I think, at the time. The story itself is pretty simple. You play Ness, who is a young boy who has strong psychic powers. An alien from the future comes and says they need Ness's help to defeat the Gigas, who is the big bad. And throughout the journey, you go and, like regular RPG, you get allies of varying skills, and you go and defeat Gigas. But the main reason why I love Earthbound and it's such a big cult hit is the art style is very simple. The combat system is unique. To this day, I have not seen anything even remotely close to the combat style. in Earthbound.
It's got a lot of Japanese RPG elements.
Yeah. I mean, there's only 4 people. All your stuff is kill X number of monsters, gain a level, get X number of stats.
Okay.
I've also heard it directly compared to Dragon Quest, particularly the battle system.
Sort of, not really. The battle system is your regular HP, MP. You have critical hits, all that stuff. The main uniqueness thing behind it is that instead of your health disappearing immediately, it ticks down on a scrolling bar. As you're going through, and as your health is ticking down, if you move fast enough, you can actually recover your health while it's still ticking down. So there's a strategic element to it. I think it was just a really, really unusual game for that point in time. I mean, I'm looking at the review scores. Game Rankings gave it an 87%. Famitsu gave it a 34 out of 40. So, I mean, this game was pretty highly rated.
And
I just don't know how it sucked.
It was very, very popular in Japan, but failed to make a dent really in the U.S. Peter, go on.
I think I can offer a little bit on that, because you mentioned a couple of key things. You mentioned 1995 and simplistic graphics. What else happened in 1995?
PlayStation!
Yep.
Complete with fanfare and everything.
And the other thing, too, is that Earthbound was
PlayStation came
competing
out
with...
in 95? Jesus.
Japan.
Yeah.
And the hype was pretty big back in 95 in America.
Yeah, and you also got to consider that Earthbound was competing against Final
released in
Fantasies 4 and 6, or back then 2 and 3. I'm just saying that Earthbound is one of those games that probably suffered from bad timing. You had the PlayStation coming around, Final Fantasy 3, also aka Final Fantasy 6, had already impressed and wowed the 16-bit crowd. Chrono Trigger did the same thing. It's probably just the wrong timing for a game of that kind in order for it to be popular in the American audience.
Well, even so, I mean, up until not that long ago, American gamers were pretty much indifferent to JRPGs.
Well, Final Fantasy and Chrono Trigger helped to change that. Nintendo worked very hard to bring Final Fantasy 1 to the market in the 8-bit days, and also tried to promote the JRPG with Dragon Quest, which you could have gotten for free with a subscription to Nintendo Power at the time. So then when Super Nintendo comes around, there was an even increased interest thanks to Square's efforts, and so you had also a couple of other games come around, like Lufia was one, Seventh Saga was another, because Enix was trying to break in.
Secret of Mana.
You didn't really see the real explosion until Final Fantasy VII, even though it was not the first JRPG on the PlayStation.
Okay.
And I think Earthbound, you said the simplistic graphics, trying to be a presentation that's in a different direction, just got caught in the middle of next generation gaming versus we already seen this. We're already all totally wowed by Final Fantasy 3/6 and Chrono Trigger.
Yeah.
That's probably not a good position to be in.
Yeah, I agree. But I think the graphic choice is more of a choice of style and less of their lack of desire to do any sort of detailed graphics.
I'm not saying that they were wrong on the design decision. I like the idea once game developers try to take a different tack with their games. But you have to admit that the American game audience is driven by shiny.
I admit that. I'll admit that.
That's what I'm saying. You're caught between two shinies, and you're not shiny enough. That hurts.
Yeah. I mean, this might be nostalgia classes here, but I just really remember and loving playing Earthbound. And at the end of the game, when you're fighting the final boss, there's just a nice tie-in with you, the player, and how you, the player, affect how successful you are at the final boss. I mean, I don't want to spoil it because there's story.
But I suspect it probably was a very good game. And based on what you said about the reviews, that supports the idea. Earthbound was a really good game.
It was a very good game, and I also think that more people are now aware of Earthbound as a result of Ness being a character in the Super Smash Bros. Series. Be that
Wasn't there actually a decently active campaign to get the Earthbound sequel actually translated outside of Japan?
Yes.
Also, funny
Didn't
side
it
note
not
on that.
happen?
It did not happen, but the fan base was so active that they got like hundreds of people over the course of 2 years, and the fan base by itself translated an English version of Mother 3, and Nintendo themselves, or the people who made it, basically put out a cease and desist order, but basically said, if it wasn't for the fact that what you did was basically illegal, we would patent this game and we would sell this game into England, into US right away.
Aw, that makes me sad. That
Well, so then, yeah, but they should either do it or get out of the way and let the fan-made version be released. I mean,
Yeah,
well,
well,
the world of computer software, intellectual property is considered the most valuable commodity, and then that creates all kinds of complications.
Yeah.
I don't know if you really want to tangle with Nintendo and how and.
Oh, I'm not saying you do, but I'm saying, Nintendo should either get out of the way or let it, go to market.
Memory serves, I think that the countersuit was that this is just a fan production. They all encourage buying the Japanese version of it. If you enjoy the series, support it by buying the game itself. And
yeah, but that's like saying if you're gonna download titles and play them through emulators, it's gonna somehow make the series more popular, and we both know that's not gonna really work out.
Yeah, I know.
Depressing.
But that's also where Lucas is from, folks. He is not another melee only character. Lucas is from Mother 3. Do your research.
Do you think? I hope people realize that there are no original characters created for Smash. Like that these were kind of characters that were in other games first.
So now we've been talking a lot about a lot of story-driven games, a lot of RPGs, adventure games, but we're going to close on a shooter. We're going to go to a game that was another one released for Dreamcast and GameCube. The game is called Ikaruga. It was made by Treasure, brought to you by the same people who brought you Gunstar Heroes.
And so what, Raj?
Sin and Punishment?
And Sin and Punishment, yeah.
There you go. Okay, you can bash me now.
Bam!
There. Congratulations, my druid doth lose 2 points. There we go. It's a top-down shooter. You're in a craft, a spaceship of sorts, and you go through various levels, shooting things.
Come on, what's the big tack here?
Shooting.
Shoot 'em up. Bullet hell.
Bullet hell.
Bullet hell.
Bullet hell.
Yeah, pretty much.
The idea
Twitch
you can
trigger
switch
shooter?
Your polarity.
Hmm?
You can switch your ship's polarity.
Yeah. For those who don't know, the polarity thing that Ben's talking about, there's 2 types of ammunition in the game: light and dark. You switch between the two whenever you choose. Basically, light defeats dark, dark defeats light. You can absorb light, and if you're using light, and vice versa.
You can eat the enemy's bullets if you catch them in the same color as your current polarity.
Yeah.
So there was some nifty gameplay aspects of it. It wasn't just you're just straight, shoot everything on the screen sort of game. There was a few nifty tricks that you could do. This came out for the GameCube in 2003. In the US, it came out on Tax Day 2003. But again, another game that was, got very, very good reviews. But shortly after the game was released, it just kind of dropped off the universe.
Brian, so people realize what kind of, didn't sell we're talking about. Why don't you go ahead and read the sales figures that we looked up?
Okay. In the first week of sales, it sold about almost 20,000 units. That was the Dreamcast version.
Not particularly strong showing.
Yeah. A little under 20,000. That was in the first week. The next week, it sank into the abyss. In the first week of GameCube, when it was released for the GameCube, it sold under 7,000 units.
And once again, by next week, it was nowhere to be seen. It had fallen into the landfill that ET is now currently sitting in.
Yet keep in mind, IGN, IGN, big gaming site. We're all familiar with IGN. Voted this game as the third greatest 2D shooter of all time.
That is
And nobody bought it.
In March.
No, nobody bought it.
Having played and enjoyed the frustration that is this game, I can simultaneously see why people wouldn't buy it, and at the same time can see why everybody should have bought it. It was.
You can start elaborating on why.
I'm a big fan of difficult games when they're done well. The Devil May Cry series kind of comes to mind. They're hard games. Some of them are harder games and kind of punishing games, but it's a rewarding feeling. And the thing about a game like Ikaruga is, yes, it's hard, and yes, you're setting yourself up for failure if you think you're going to win, but at the same time, it's fun. It is just so much fun to get lost in that title. And try and follow all of the crazy action going on screen. It's got nice bright visuals. There is the whole polarity thing going on, but it's hard, and that's definitely a turnoff to some people.
For those who have never played a shoot 'em up game, in Japan right now, there's a thing called bullet hell. To best describe it, the screen is full of bullets, and there's a very specific path you have to follow through those bullets. Otherwise, you get shot and you get killed. And keep in mind too, these bullets are generally pretty decently sized, and a shoot 'em up game only has a specific ratio of screen, so you can only move left and right, up and down so many times, and before you get hit by a bullet.
There's also figure out that because of the polarity, you have to keep switching to stay in the safe path. Eat the correct bullets, avoid the incorrect bullets.
So a lot of quick switching up of buttons.
Yes.
Yeah.
There are a few maps in there where you're fighting some boss or other where there is a very specific path that you have to follow if you have a prayer of staying alive. And they get very fast, and if you can keep up with it, you've got to have like wired reflexes or something. The other thing that makes Ikaruga just astounding, it's really pretty graphically, but dude, the soundtrack, holy god, the music to this game is just incredible.
It does have a very, very good soundtrack, and while we're going all fan squee on this game, meanwhile the rest of the planet's going, what the fuck are they talking about? Ben mentioned that the sheer difficulty of this game was probably a turnoff, but there has to be more than just difficulty. I mean, we've all lived through the days of the NES and difficult games and notebooks of passwords. So
Contra.
I can offer you one more.
Go ahead.
The fact that it was a top-down shooter in 2003. The top-down shooters really started to fade out in the fourth generation. There weren't very many to be found when we get to the sixth generation, like the GameCube.
Despite all its praise?
Yeah, there weren't very many 2D shooters to be found anywhere.
Even today, you can
continually kept making them, but a lot of them just did not have the recognition. Ikaruga definitely didn't have any recognition. You see a name that's written in Japanese, and you go, "What the hell is that?" Doesn't tell you what the game is at all. Sometimes the title helps you know what the kind of game is, and then of course you got this fact is a genre that's pretty much fading out of existence. It doesn't help either. Great game though. It's really too bad that a lot of people miss out on a real good title despite that.
I think that's a good time to mention how sometimes people are going to have a second chance with these games now. With like Xbox Live Arcade and PS3 Marketplace, a lot of these games that originally didn't sell all that well are now having second chances on the 7th generation and future consoles.
That's very true.
Amen to that.
With the advent of the Wii's Virtual Console, and as you mentioned, the PS3, the PlayStation Network, and Xbox Live Arcade. That is true. A lot of these old games, that are getting sort of a second wind, another chance at getting themselves out there, in the gaming public for people to sample. Ikaruga's no exception. It is available on the Xbox Live Arcade. But if you have a GameCube, you can find it.
Right.
It is on Amazon. I think that's how I got it.
No, that's
All right, I just looked right now.
Be as well. They'll run the GameCube version.
Yeah, I just looked right now. I was curious. As of April 12th, 2008, so this is 2 years ago, almost 3. Ikaruga had over 22,000 sales since it was released and on the Xbox Live Arcade.
So, just in those 2+ years, it's
probably at least beaten the combined Dreamcast and GameCube sale figures.
Oh, it's certainly beaten the GameCube sales.
So it's actually moving units at this point. But that's interesting that it is sold so much better. I mean, think about it. There were probably a lot of people. The main reason I could think that why that might be true is, I remember playing this game in college, and it would be a title where, okay, my friend has one copy, and the two of us are going to be playing against each other on that one copy. And now we have online play, so I'm going to be at home, and I'm going to get my copy, and he's going to be at home, and he's going to get his copy. And now suddenly, even though the core number of players hasn't actually shifted, they've sold twice as many units just because we're going to be playing in different rooms.
So, I mean, already, obviously, since, this game hasn't the sales numbers that many other games have, I mean, it's still only 20,000 units. It's definitely had a bit of a new life since being released online.
But that doesn't really surprise me. I mean, a lot of games find second or third or fifth lives on re-releases.
Oh yeah, just take the 20th incarnation of Final Fantasy I, for example. It's
Heck, look at Ocarina of Time. How many different times has that been released now? We've had the N64 release, the GameCube re-release, the Virtual Console re-release, the 3DS re-release. I mean, do you think there aren't people who haven't... I know somebody who personally has probably purchased 5 different copies of this game already and is looking forward to purchasing his 6th.
Didn't they do a reprint? Yeah, Final Fantasy IV. They did a reprint too of the Ocarina of Time, the gold version.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really surprise me that a game that actually bothers to get a re-release does better the second time around. People know about the game. I wouldn't be surprised if, Beyond Good and Evil is also, I think, available now on the Xbox Live Arcade and PlayStation Network.
I know it's available on Steam.
Yeah, I don't know that it's necessarily going to do better, but I would really be surprised if it didn't at least do well in those versions.
Yeah, and as you were just saying, man, Beyond Good and Evil has been re-released for the Xbox Live Arcade and the PlayStation Network, so they are there. A lot of these games are there, so we've been talking now for the last hour about how good these games are. Shouldn't this be a good time for you to actually download them?
Hint, hint.
Exactly.
Hint.
Nudge, nudge.
You'd think we'd make money by the number of times we mentioned some of these titles, but we do not.
Yeah, that would be that would be nice if we could make a living off of simply recommending games to you.
These are not paid endorsements, but
yeah, if they don't want to send us a chat, they can send it to 123 Fake Street.
Don't send them there; they'll never clear.
Now, if you're going to write out a check, make sure it's in large numbers. Pay to the order of Brian Williams.
Most friends just call me Cash.
I'm also known by the aliases Benjamins, Moolah, and De Niro's.
Exactly.
So, basically, we're coming full circle here. Again, all these games, which suffered at the hands of the free market, because we're not in a socialist society. These games that were originally shunned by the gaming public for whatever reasons, we've dissected them to death, be it bad marketing, difficulty, different cultures between different gaming cultures, whatever. A lot of these games are finding new life, so go get them. And I really think that, when these games originally, didn't get the chance they deserved, now that they're re-released, now I think would be a good time. I mean, and obviously, since they're available online now, they're probably cheaper than they were when they were first released.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think if memory serves, Ikaruga, I have it on Xbox Live Arcade. I think I got it for like 800 Microsoft points, which in real money is $10.
Whatever the case, these
disc.
there. I mean, as long as we continue to have video games, there will always be games that, go largely unnoticed. And then, of course, you have the flip side in which you have bad games that sell millions of copies. But that's another discussion. On our next episode, on episode 5, we revisit the Nintendo Power Awards. The awards are in. We will bring back Peter, Erica, and Ron, who made predictions in the first episode. We'll see how their predictions stacked up to the rest of the Nintendo fandom. So we have that to look forward to. Any last words, guys?
Last words.
If you can find some of these hidden gems, I personally would recommend going out and getting them, whether you buy them or acquire them through other mysterious methods.
To that end, both Shadow of the Colossus, Ico, and I believe Beyond Good and Evil are being re-released through high-def versions. So if any of you happen to be graphical snobs, that option is still open to you. And yeah, don't forget that sometimes some great franchises can come out of a game that didn't necessarily sell too well in the first place. So,
anything else? Peter, Erica?
Anything else?
Oh, you ass. All right.
I'm just happy I started a running joke.
I see. All right, I'm putting this to bed. Enough, I say. Say goodnight, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.